Take a close look at this map. Our beginning does not lie in the ocean, but on a piece of old, yellowed parchment known as the Liu Gang map. This map is believed to be a 1763 copy of an original dating back to 1418. Let that number sink into your mind, 1418. That is 74 years before Christopher Columbus stepped onto the deck of the Santa Maria, and centuries before Europeans had a complete concept of the Earth's shape. On this map, we don't just see Asia or Europe, but clearly the outlines of Africa, Australia, and most shockingly, the shapes of both North and South America. For decades, scholars have engaged in fierce and uncompromising debates. If this map is authentic, then every history textbook you and I have ever studied is a massive lie. Could the person who discovered America actually not be a gold-thirsty European, but a Chinese eunuch over 2 meters tall, leading a fleet of massive ships the size of football fields? The globally sensational book, 1421, The Year China Discovered America, by former British Royal Navy submarine commander Gavin Menzies dropped a bomb on the historical community by claiming that the Ming dynasty's fleet didn't just sail along the coast of Africa, but they actually crossed the Pacific Ocean, set foot in the Americas, and even left DNA traces among Native American populations. Imagine 1492 again. Columbus arrives in the Bahamas with 3 tiny, battered ships, carrying starving and bewildered sailors. All 3 of his ships combined wouldn't equal a third of the size of a single Ming dynasty treasure ship. The Santa Maria was less than 30 meters long. But what if the historical script took a different turn? What would have happened if, as Columbus just set foot on the white sands of the New World, he didn't encounter indigenous people armed with stone spears, but instead faced an army of tens of thousands of men in gleaming scale armor, standing guard before floating wooden castles as tall as 4-story buildings, with 9 red silk sails towering up to block out the sky? Today, we will blow away the layers of time's dust, dive deep into the records that were suspiciously burned in the archives of the Forbidden City, and use the most modern technical analyses to answer a question that could completely change your worldview. If the invincible Ming fleet had continued eastward and landed in California, would we be living in a world where Chinese is the global language, and Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. today is a giant pavilion worshipping Confucius? Do not take your eyes off the screen, because the hidden truths are about to be revealed right now. To understand how China could build a fleet so terrifyingly powerful that the world had to wait until World War I to see a similar scale, we must go back to a bloody past. The great admiral of this fleet was not an aristocrat born with a silver spoon in his mouth, nor a dignified Confucian official. He was a Muslim, and he was a eunuch. His real name was Ma He, born in Yunnan. His life began with a brutal tragedy that historical dramas often deliberately ignore. When Ma He was only 10 years old, the Ming army under the command of General Ming swept down into Yunnan to wipe out the last remnants of the Yuan dynasty. Ma He's family was massacred. The 10-year-old boy was taken prisoner, painfully and brutally castrated, and then thrown into servitude in the mansion of the Prince of Yen, Wu Di, the man who would later become the great Yongle Emperor and also a notorious tyrant. Try to imagine the immense psychological strength of a boy who survived physical mutilation, rose through the toxic and deeply scheming political environment of the imperial court, to ultimately become the emperor's most trusted right-hand man. Zhu Di did not ascend the throne legitimately. He usurped it from his own nephew, the Zhengwen emperor, in a brutal civil war that lasted 3 years. After capturing Nanjing, Zhu Di carried out one of the bloodiest purges in history. Confucian officials loyal to the former emperor were executed along with their extended families to the 10th degree, rivers of blood flowed. To compensate for his lack of legitimacy and to demonstrate his absolute authority over the world, Zhu Di decided to undertake an insane project, constructing a fleet unprecedented in human history to reach out into the great ocean. And the only person he trusted to entrust with this monumental task, the one carrying the empire's hegemonic ambitions on his shoulders, was the eunuch Ma He, now granted the surname Zheng and known as Zheng He. Within the Ming court at that time existed a persistent and bitter conflict between two factions. On one side was the eunuch faction, those who supported opening up, trading, and expanding power outward. On the other side was the Confucian official faction, conservative scholars who valued self-sufficient agriculture and viewed spending the state treasury on sea voyages as an extravagant waste, even a direct threat to the moral order and stability of the empire. This internal tug-of-war was the smoldering fire that would ultimately burn down the greatest maritime legacy of the East. We won't just talk about history with empty rumors. Let's look at the technical evidence from the Longjiang shipyard in Nanjing. This shipyard was not a normal riverside carpentry workshop, it was a massive industrial complex of the 15th century. Over 30,000 of the most skilled artisans from all over the country were summoned. They worked day and night without rest. To have enough materials, tens of thousands of giant Nanmu antique trees were felled from the primeval forests in Sichuan, drifting down the Yangtze River for years before reaching Nanjing. Their products were the treasure ships, Baochuan, true leviathan monsters of the ocean. According to the Ming Shirlu records, Zhenghe's largest ships reached lengths of about 120 to 130 meters, and widths up to 50 meters. Many Western historians once thought these numbers were exaggerated, because wood could not withstand the tension of ocean waves at that size without snapping. But they underestimated the Ming engineers. The Chinese applied maritime technologies that were hundreds of years ahead of their time. The key to the sturdiness of these treasure ships lay in the watertight compartments technology. The hull was divided into many isolated small compartments, separated by thick wooden bulkheads and sealed with a mixture of tung oil and lime. If a part of the hull was pierced by a reef, water would only flood a single compartment, and the ship would remain afloat. This is the core technology that the West took nearly 600 years to learn and widely apply, typically on the legendary Titanic in 1911. It is ironic that the technology that helped the Ming ships conquer the ocean was the very thing that failed on the Titanic due to improper construction. Beyond muscular strength, this fleet possessed a highly sophisticated brain. While European sailors of the time still had to hug the coast for fear of falling off the edge of a flat earth, Zhenghe's fleet confidently ventured into the misty open sea. They carried advanced magnetic compasses, placed in wooden bowls of water to maintain absolute balance despite the crashing waves. They used the Maokuan map, a nautical masterpiece combined with the Qianxing Shu star chart, a method of measuring the angle of the stars against the horizon to determine latitude with astonishing accuracy. When this fleet left Taicang port, it did not look like an expedition, but like a floating city on the move. 317 ships, carrying 28,000 people. Not just sailors and soldiers, on board were diplomats, interpreters, doctors, carpenters, and even agricultural experts to grow fresh vegetables right on the deck to combat scurvy, the disease that killed countless Western sailors later on. They carried thousands of tons of fine silk, exquisite ceramics, premium tea, and copper coins. This meticulous preparation was not for a desperate journey in search of new lands. This was a military parade to project the power of the greatest empire on the planet at that time. There is a massive misconception when talking about Zhenghe's voyages. Many educational materials often paint him as a purely peaceful ambassador, spreading civilization everywhere, completely contrary to the brutality of the Spanish conquistadors in the Americas. But the historical truth is much more complex and thorny. Zhenghe's fleet carried a diplomatic message wrapped in velvet, but inside was a sharp sword. Ming Dynasty China viewed the world through the lens of Tianxia, all under heaven, everything under this sky belonged to the Son of Heaven. The world order they wanted to establish was not based on colonial conquest or exhaustive resource extraction, but on the tributary system. Small surrounding kingdoms had to send envoys to Nanjing, kowtow to the Ming Emperor, and offer local products to acknowledge a symbolic submission. In return, the Ming dynasty would bestow gifts worth many times more, guarantee military security, and allow free trade. But what would happen if a nation refused to kneel? Zhenghe did not hesitate to use force. His third voyage to Sri Lanka is a bloody testament. When the local king, Alakeshvara, showed a hostile attitude, refused to pay tribute, and plotted to plunder the fleet, Zheng He did not back down. He led an elite force of 2,000 soldiers, launched a night raid straight into the capital, defeated Sri Lanka's army of tens of thousands, captured King Alakeshvara and the entire royal family alive, and escorted them back to Nanjing to face judgment before the Yongle Emperor. They also intervened militarily in civil wars in Sumatra and wiped out the notorious pirate Lord Chen Zui in the Strait of Malacca. This confirms a cold truth: if Zheng He's fleet had gone further east, crossed the barrier of the Pacific Ocean, and encountered the Aztec Empire in Mexico or the Inca in Peru, they absolutely possessed enough military strength, discipline, and tactics to crush any resistance. However, with the Tianxia mindset, they would not have burned down temples or enslaved the indigenous people in mines as the Spanish did. The cruel scenario of history might not have occurred. Instead, Zheng He would have left a garrison, built trading posts, Guanchang, and demanded that the Aztec Emperor Montezuma send tribute and princes to Nanjing as hostages to study Confucianism. The Americas might have become a distant but peaceful vassal of the Great Ming. The downfall of this invincible fleet did not come from a massive storm or a horrific naval battle on the ocean, but originated from the dark, stifling, and scheme-filled corridors of the Forbidden City. When the Yongle Emperor passed away during a military campaign in Mongolia, the greatest umbrella protecting Zheng He and the eunuch faction shattered as well. The Confucian officials, who had silently endured suppression for decades, now had the opportunity to rise and seize back dominant power. To them, Zheng He's magnificent sea voyages brought nothing but frivolous luxury items like giraffes, ivory, or gemstones, while the national treasury was bleeding every day. But is that the whole truth, or just the tip of the iceberg? There is an extremely chilling conspiracy theory in historical circles regarding the real reason the Ming court decided to erase all traces of this fleet. When the Minister of War, Liu Daxia, ordered the burning of all nautical logs, treasure ship design blueprints, and astronomical records of Zheng He, the act was so drastic, so thorough, and so insane that it looked as if they were trying to hide something deeply terrifying. Did this fleet go further than what was permitted to be recorded, and bring back a world map so vast that it directly threatened the center of the universe doctrine of the Great Ming? Or worse, did the sailors on those giant ships accidentally bring back a strange pathogen, or some political secret from an unknown continent, forcing the court to execute the most ruthless information blockade in Eastern history? Whatever the real reason buried under the ashes was, its consequence was the most disastrous step backward for human civilization. The Ming dynasty decided to move the capital from the prosperous, waterbound Nanjing up to the freezing Beijing to focus on dealing with the threat from the Mongols in the north. Mountains of gold and silver, instead of being used to build ships to reach out to the world, were poured into the construction of the Forbidden City and the renovation of the Great Wall. The Great Ming had locked itself in a magnificent and impregnable cage. The notorious hygiene sea ban was officially enacted. Coastal residents were strictly forbidden from building large ships with more than 2 masts, and any act of trading with foreigners was punishable by death. The great treasure ships that once shook the oceans were left to rot at the Longjiang docks, then heartbreakingly dismantled for firewood or civilian construction materials. An empire that once extended its tentacles of power all the way to the coast of East Africa now shivered and cowered behind brick and stone walls. It was this short-sighted and fear-driven decision that created a massive power vacuum on the seas. And just a few decades later, tiny nations on the fringes of Europe like Portugal and Spain, with much more primitive ships but armed with bottomless greed and extreme recklessness, rose to conquer the oceans, opening the brutal colonial era that reshaped the entire world order we live in today. But now, close your eyes and let your imagination fly far beyond the narrow and harsh limits of the actual timeline. What if in 1421, amidst the fierce waves of the Pacific, Zheng He did not order the bows of his ships to turn back from the coast of Kenya? Instead, he stood on the towering observation deck of the flagship treasure ship, his sharp gaze fixed toward the east where the sun rises, and decided to continue the greatest journey of mankind. This massive fleet could absolutely have caught the Kuroshio Current, a powerful stream dubbed the Black Current, sweeping past the eastern coast of Japan and heading straight across the North Pacific. Technically, with immense food reserves, the ability to grow green vegetables right on the deck to fight scurvy, and advanced freshwater filtration technology, the Ming ships had more than enough capacity to survive this months-long voyage. And then, after months of drifting in the misty ocean, the fleet's observation deck would ring out with a frantic cry as they saw a new horizon emerge through the fog. It was not India, not the Horn of Africa. It was the sun-drenched, pristine, and majestic coastline of modern-day California. The first encounter between the Great Ming fleet and the indigenous inhabitants of the Americas would be a scene so spectacular that no Hollywood blockbuster could fully capture its grandeur. Imagine Native American warriors from North American tribes standing on cliffs, gripping obsidian spears, looking down in astonishment at the surface of the Pacific Ocean. They wouldn't see three torn, tiny wooden ships of white men. Instead, they would hold their breath to witness hundreds of giant wooden castles made of teak proudly cutting through the waves into San Francisco Bay. Giant golden dragon flags would flutter, covering an entire corner of the sky. The sound of gongs, drums, horns, and celebratory cannon fire would echo, shaking the mountains and forests. Zheng He, the majestic admiral over 2 meters tall in a brilliant gold-embroidered silk robe, would step onto the sand alongside thousands of imperial guards wearing gleaming scale armor. However, instead of drawing swords to slaughter, plunder, and claim kingship the way the Spanish conquerors did, Zheng He would act strictly in accordance with the Tianxia diplomatic philosophy. He would bestow the softest silks, exquisite ceramics, fragrant tea, and priceless iron and steel tools upon the natives, solely in exchange for a welcome, fresh water, and the strange exotic products of the new land to bring back and present to the Son of Heaven. That great voyage certainly would not have stopped in North America. The fleet would continue riding the wind, moving southward along the Pacific coast, and ultimately encounter the most powerful force in the Americas at that time, the Aztec Empire in Mesoamerica. This would be a seismic encounter, permanently altering the trajectory of human history. The mighty Emperor Montezuma would not have to face the bandit Hernán Cortés and his army of a few hundred bloodthirsty mercenaries. Instead, he would welcome a majestic diplomatic delegation, carrying the symbolic power of a civilization that had flourished brilliantly for thousands of years. The Aztecs, who revered gold and silver merely for their aesthetic beauty rather than viewing them as currency, would be completely overwhelmed by the superior technologies of the Easterners, such as iron and steel smelting, papermaking, the compass, and especially the terrifying power of gunpowder. The massive disparity in civilizational awareness and military strength would make the Aztec elite quickly realize that submission was the only path to survival. At Guanchang, a giant Ming dynasty trading post and military base, would be erected right in the heart of the magnificent capital Tenochtitlan. We would witness the most bizarre and fascinating cultural fusion in history. Elite Aztec warriors wearing feathered headdresses but donning Ming iron armor, bloody sacrificial pyramids gradually dismantled to be replaced by large-scale Confucian academies, and indigenous Americans beginning to learn how to hold a calligraphy brush to write Chinese characters on deer-skin scrolls. But the greatest and most profoundly impactful change would not lie in politics or the military, but in ecology. A Columbian exchange would still occur, but in completely the reverse direction, moving from east to west and a full century earlier than in actual history. The gigantic, bottomless holds of the treasure ships would be filled with the resilient crops of the New World: potatoes, corn, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and tomatoes. When these ships gloriously cut through the waves to return to Nanjing port, they would actually be carrying the golden key to solve the most intractable problem of every Chinese dynasty: famine. Unlike finicky wet rice that required flooded deltas and temperate climates, corn and sweet potatoes could sprout and thrive in the most arid, rocky, and freezing mountainous regions of the continent. The explosion of these new superfoods would create an unprecedented demographic shock in Eastern history. The Ming dynasty's population would not hesitantly stall at 100 million, it could easily skyrocket to 300 or even 400 million right from the 16th century. This massive population pressure would become the detonator forcing the empire to accelerate urbanization, radically improve labor tools, and expand handicraft manufacturing to solve employment. Instead of having to wait for a Europe with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, we would very likely witness the first primitive steam engines puffing black smoke into the eastern sky from gigantic silk-weaving factory districts in Hangzhou, Suzhou, or Guangzhou. In this hypothetical parallel world, the death sentence for indigenous Americans would also be rewritten in a completely different script. When Europeans arrived, they brought along invisible, biological weapons, smallpox, measles, and influenza, devastating diseases that wiped out 90% of the native population in just a few decades because they completely lacked antibodies. If the Chinese arrived first, the transmission of pathogens would still be an inescapable biological reality. However, the vital difference would lie in the pattern of contact and the colonial mindset. The Ming Empire had absolutely no need to bring tens of thousands of civilians to settle en masse, seize land, or set up plantations draining the labor of native slaves. They would only establish sporadic trading posts and maintain a limited number of officials, interpreters, and garrison soldiers. This sparse, controlled, and primarily commercial contact would make pathogens spread at a much slower rate. This would inadvertently create an extremely precious buffer period, long enough for the indigenous immune systems to gradually adapt, resist, and recover. The great empires like the Aztec, Maya, or Inca would certainly suffer painful casualties, but they would absolutely not be entirely wiped off the world map the way history has cruelly recorded. They would survive, resiliently absorbing the medical technologies, metallurgy, and agricultural knowledge of the East, and gradually rise to transform into powerful, bustling autonomous vassal kingdoms on the other side of the ocean. By the 21st century of this timeline, the global geopolitical map would be a completely alien and shocking picture to our current mindset. The Atlantic Ocean, instead of being the bustling maritime center of the Western world, would merely be a dark, freezing sea, infested with pirates and completely marginalized from the flow of trade. Europe would very likely still be wallowing in prolonged religious wars, medieval plagues, and chronic poverty. The most violently beating heart of the global economy would lie entirely within the vast Pacific Ocean. The financial megacities coordinating the world's cash flow would not bear names like London, Paris, or New York. Instead, wealth would circulate continuously and endlessly among Shanghai, Guangzhou, and a chain of hypermodern superports sprouting up shoulder to shoulder along the west coast of North America, places that might be called highly symbolic names like New Hope Port, modern-day San Francisco, or Gold Mountain, Los Angeles. At these global trade centers, Arab, Japanese, and Aztec-descendant merchants, along with impoverished European traders, would have to wear Eastern silk garments, enjoy tea in Jingdezhen porcelain, and negotiate multi-billion-dollar megaprojects in a single common language, Mandarin Chinese. Banknotes printed with the majestic dragon of the Great Ming would be the core reserve currency of the whole world, and Confucian philosophy, emphasizing order and hierarchy, rather than the liberal democracy of Greece, would become the sacred foundation of international law and morality. History is essentially just a chain of fragile dominoes, where a gentle breeze of fate, or a nod of power, can reshape the entire form of humanity. The event of Zheng He and the greatest naval fleet of all time being permanently buried in the ashes of narrow-minded political infighting in the Forbidden City is one of the greatest and most regrettable tragedies of the era. It was not merely the end of a glorious epoch, but also the most profound, bitter, and ruthless reminder throughout the flow of history that the eternal greatness and prosperity of a nation never, and will never, come from locking itself behind towering fortress walls or turning its back on the vastness and mystery of the outside world. True power only belongs to those who possess a burning curiosity, a trans-century vision, and the ultimate courage to set sail into the great ocean, face the storms and monsters, and explore the unknown. If only one minister had not submitted a memorial demanding the burning of the records, if the Yongle Emperor could have lived another decade to maintain his hegemonic vision, then the Eastern Dragon would have truly spread its giant wings to fully envelop the entire world, and Western civilization might have forever sunk into the cold darkness of historical oblivion. As for you, after experiencing this time travel journey, what do you think of this soul-shaking historical scenario? Would a world operating under the guidance of the Eastern Tianxia system bring about a more peaceful, prosperous, and orderly era, or would it also harbor cruelty, oppression, and sophisticated exploitation in a completely different manner from the habits of Western colonialism? Please leave your profound analysis, unique perspectives, and strong counterarguments right down in the comments section, because the greatest, most mind-opening historical discussions always begin with fierce opposing viewpoints. And if you are someone who carries the burning passion for closely guarded historical mysteries, conspiracy theories carrying the weight of evidence, and what-if scenarios capable of shifting the universe like, what would happen if Adolf Hitler successfully acquired the atomic bomb before the Allies, then do not hesitate a second longer and hit the subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single dedicated video from us. The journey back in time to decode our world has only officially just begun. Thank you for your companionship, and see you all in the next mesmerizing, haunting, and explosive historical videos.